Welcome to this chess opening review of the Ponziani. This opening was named after Domenico Lorenzo Ponziani, who in 1769 came up with a counter gambit where he played f5 in this position. And this is also named after him, the Ponziani counter gambit. And so the Ponziani opening was named after this master, Domenico Lorenzo Ponziani, and it was because of this 1769 move that he came up with, the f5 push here. And so if I go back to the beginning, and I'll play out the first moves, how we arrive at this Ponziani opening. E4 is played by white, then E5, knight to F3, knight to C6. And here, many times, bishop to C4, bishop to B5 is played. So the C3 move may surprise your opponents because they most likely don't see this opening as often. And the Ponziani opening, it's a lot older than 1769 when it was named after Ponziani for his counter gambit that he came up with. The Ponziani opening was first in chess literature as far back as, I believe, 1497. So this is an old opening that was played more often in the past, but in modern times it's not played as much because it's considered a slower opening, because the C3 move is played to help push and support this D4 pawn move. But in this opening, by moving this pawn, you're not developing a piece, and also you're giving black time to attack this E4 pawn, which is what he does many times in this opening. And so we'll play through a variation where this pawn is attacked by knight to F6 here. And so I'll go through a possible game scenario that could play out with this knight to F6 move, and then after that I'll show other variations. And so after knight to F6, we have this thrust in the middle, which is usually played in this Ponziani opening, and that is why C3 was played to help support this D4 pawn move. And then after a capture here, we have a push of this pawn to D5. So this is a theme in this opening that can play out often, where this D pawn is pushed forward up into black's position. And so if the knight retreats, here we could have a capture, and now black must be careful not to fall into a common trap here. And so in the game, better would be something like knight to G6, attacking this central knight of white. But black has to be careful not to fall in the trap of attacking with this pawn with D6 here. And so if D6 is played, then white can check with the bishop. And then, if we have a block, capture that pawn, and now black must not immediately play queen to b6, threatening a mate down here, because then we could just have c takes b7 with a discovered check on the king, and now this pawn can go on to capture and create a queen up here. So in order to avoid that, after this D6, D captures C6, better would be bishop captures, and then after knight captures, then the queen could move here and threaten mate. But already, if we look at the evaluation, white is ahead here, so black is just in trouble because now the knight retreats, blocking this checkmate threat by the queen and knight, but leaving a discovered check on the king, and this bishop is also protected by this knight move. And so here, if the king moves, we have a possible castling, and in this position, black's king is left in the center where it could become a target. We have an isolated queen pawn here that could become weak and a target as well. And also white is ahead a pawn. And if we look at the evaluation, it gives white plus 2.4 in this variation. So black needs to avoid that earlier trap, which was, let's see here, which was attacking with this pawn, attacking the knight by moving to d6, and that led to the bishop to b5 check move and that whole downward spiral for black. And so instead, if we go back, instead of this move, knight to g6 should be played, which lets this bishop develop, attacks the knight. And then after the queen move here, defending this knight that is being attacked and attacking black's knight, we would have a queen move here, and then trades in the center. So capture, 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 knight captures, and then development by both sides. The knight jumps up here to attack this knight. So after an exchange, we see everybody developing, castling the kings to safety, and then this bishop moves off this open file here, and there'll be a battle for this open e file with the rooks. And so before that happens, another common theme in the Ponziani is for white to push forward with the pawns and gain space on the queen side. And so after a6, we have a further push by this pawn, gaining more space, and development, and now the battle on the e file as the rooks attempt to take control and fight for this open file. And development, preparing to create batteries on the e file, and then this bishop repositions to help fight in the center. And after this bishop move, we have an exchange in the middle here. So trades, and this pawn is under attack, so it moves forward. And here the game is pretty much even. The kings come into the center, and so with no mistakes in this position, it will probably fizzle out into a draw, whether it's agreed to by the players or they play further and just trade off more pieces and pawns. And so that is a possible scenario that could play out with the knight to f6 move at the beginning. So if we go back after e4, e5, the opening moves, the Ponziani move here with pawn to c3, and then knight to f6 is what we looked at. And so instead of this move, if we go back, instead of knight to f6, another main possibility is d5. And so here, if the queen is played to a4, it pins this knight, it covers this pawn in the center, and then we have this bishop move which blocks the pin, breaks this pin on the knight to the king, and then a capture. Then after this move, which is possible because now the queen is under attack and this knight is protected by the pawn, the queen will have to retreat, and then capture, capture, development, and this pawn pushes forward, attacking the queen, forcing the queen to retreat and giving black time to further develop. Now black is ready to castle, and this pawn pushes forward, giving white more space in the center and unblocking this bishop. And so after castling by black, a pin on the knight, and then this move forcing the bishop to decide whether to retreat or capture. And so retreat, maintaining the pin, and then the game could play out with these further moves, castling, and then maneuvering. Play will revolve once again down this e file, and the knight repositions here to possibly jump back to c2 and then e3 to stop this pawn from moving forward and to help control the center. And we have this a6 move, threatening to push forward and attack the bishop. So the bishop retreats, and the pawn move is made anyway. And a rook move, helping to fight for this central e-file. And now this rook moves behind this pawn, which has been pushed forward. So the rooks do best on a position, or sorry, on a square where they're behind a pawn that has been pushed forward or an open file. So we see here the only open file, well, right now there is no completely open files, so that is why these rooks move in behind these pawns that have been pushed forward, and that gives them more maneuverability behind this pawn as it is pushed forward, and it can support these pawns as they move forward. And so here we have a confrontation. Here the c pawn attacks this b pawn, so the pawn is protected, and also now this pawn is under attack. So after exchanges, we have another rook brought to the center to help support this pawn that is moved forward. Capture, the knight repositions into the center, and now a pin of the knight to the queen. And the final moves here, a thrust in the middle by white's pawn and a counter thrust here, attempting to attack this bishop so the queen could move over to stop this pawn from moving forward. And so that's as far as I'll go in that example, but that's another possibility of how this Ponziani opening could play out with this d5 move at the beginning. So we looked at knight to f6. So in this position, first we looked at knight to f6, immediately attacking this pawn with the knight, and the other option is attacking the pawn with a d5 pawn move. And so the next example that I'll look at is this f5 move. And so this is the Ponziani counter gambit in the Ponziani opening. And this is what the inventor, the opening is named after Ponziani, but he became famous when he studied and came up with this f5 Ponziani counter gambit. And so in this position, e4 is attacked, so this outside pawn is attacking a center pawn. And so white has to make a decision here, and he ignores this and counter attacks in the center, giving his bishop room to develop and attacking this e pawn here. And so the game may play out with f takes e4. The knight recaptures in the center here. Development by both sides. And now we have a pin on this knight. So the queen, instead of breaking the pin with the bishop, moves forward here to help put pressure on a possible attack. If the pawn recaptured, then the queen could capture and attack the bishop. And so white responds with an immediate capture. The queen captures, not wanting to break his pawns here. And now it gives time for white to remaneuver his knight, attacking the queen and giving him time after the queen moves to block this pawn's forward momentum here, and also to be able to capture if this pawn would move to d5. And so, on one other thing, the knight here also protects this g2 pawn, which the queen is attacking, and allows the bishop to move without the threat of the queen capturing here. And so bishop develops, attacking this line and preventing a castle kingside by black. And so here we have the knight attacking, trying to drive that bishop away so that black can castle over here on the king side. So after a retreat, we finally have a castling kingside by black, and the game may play out with the following moves here. Castling after, well, first chasing this knight away and gaining space on the queen side once again. And then we have this move, bishop to c4, checking the king. After the king move, the knight develops, and here the bishop attacks this knight, and finally castling by white. And so then we have a remaneuvering of this knight, and now the queen and the knight are piling up on this pawn here. And so the pawn is protected and the bishop is under attack. And so capture, capture, capture. And in this position, it looks like white is slightly ahead here. And so I would say overall, if f5 is played, white will probably come out okay, and he doesn't seem to have too many problems in this position. So let's jump on to move on to the next possibility. I think white would be okay in this Ponziani counter gambit variation. And so if we go back, so once again we looked at, in this position, knight to f6 attacking the e4 pawn, d5 attacking the e4 pawn, and then we looked at f5 attacking this e4 pawn. And so now we'll go on to look at less attacking variations, more passive play. So if black instead just plays d6, then the game could play out a little differently. Immediately, this bishop jumps to c4 to put pressure on this f7 pawn. And here, black could play a little differently by pushing here and preparing to bring the bishop to g7. And then finally, this push here of d4, which is the main reason that c3 is played to help fortify this d4 pawn move. And the queen moves here to cover this potentially weak f pawn, and also to add some control and keep an eye on the center here. And so white castles, the bishop is moved, and then we have a capture, capture, trades in the middle there. The knight moves up to protect this pawn, but the queen could not have captured this pawn anyway because of a rook move here pinning the queen to the king. And so we see in this position white is already castled and black's king is still stuck in the center here. So finally the knight moves, preparing way for a castle on king's side by black. So here we have an attack, and once again this pawn cannot be captured as it is kind of a poisoned pawn. If it is taken, then we have a rook move here that could pin a piece to the queen and the king. Alright, so the queen retreats back to help guard this position, and now the rook takes control of this e-file, backing up this pawn, preparing to possibly push this pawn forward and support the pawn, and also to try and control this e-file, which also seems to happen quite often in this Ponziani opening. They battle for the e-file. Alright, so here bishop to g4, pinning this knight, and so h3 puts the question to the bishop of whether to retreat, but here it cannot retreat, or g4 will trap the bishop. And so capture, and queen recaptures, then castling by black finally. And then here we have a pin of this knight to the queen. And so h6 forces the bishop to make a decision. The bishop retreats, keeping this pin. And that's as far as I will go in this variation. So here we'll probably have the rooks moving into the center, possibly pushing this, white could possibly attempt to push forward, or white could try and put pressure down this d-file. Once again, you have the potential for this a4 pawn to be pushed on the queen's side to gain space. But this was an interesting but probably more passive variation that black could play. And so if we go back, we just looked at this d6 variation in response to the Ponziani opening. So next I will look at e7 being played instead. So after c3 by white, bishop to e7. And once again, this is a more passive move, so white will probably not have too many difficulties because black is not immediately attacking this e4 pawn. White can just go ahead and develop. He can push forward here, attacking in the center. And then after an exchange, we see here, this is the Romanician variation of the Ponziani opening. Black lets white gain this strong pawn center, but the reason he does that is because he plans to push forward attacking, and then white has to make a decision here whether to push forward and gain space or exchange. And so in this position, white usually captures. White will be left with an isolated pawn here, but this pawn will help white gain and keep space in the center and support pieces in the center. So play would possibly play out like this. The knight moves to attack instead of immediately capturing with the queen, because then we could have had knight to c3 chasing the queen. And so after check by this bishop, a block, capture, capture, the queen is attacked. Now the queen captures the pawn, and we have castling by white, development, and finally this knight moves to c3, now attacking the queen anyway. And so the queen retreats, and then the game could play out further with development by both sides. Um, and then this knight repositions here to fortify the f6 knight, but also attack this knight on c3 here. And then queen develops, castling by black, and finally some exchanges. And here, white has an advantage. It's showing plus more than half a pawn to white's favor. And here, after this rook move attacking the queen can retreat back, and this b2 pawn cannot be captured, because then we would have a knight fork of the queen and the rook. And also now there is a threat of a fork here on c6 that could fork the queen and the rook. So that's as far as I'll go in this position. And now it is showing white a full point ahead in this position. So in this variation, it looks like once again white doesn't have many problems, because black started out rather passively, and it gave, or excuse me, black started out passively, and it gave white time to just build up his position and attack. And so let's see, if we go back, and I'll check and see if there's anything I missed. Go back to the beginning. So we just looked at this bishop to e7 move, which was rather passive. I think I covered everything except one more thing that I would like to go over, and that was this possibility here in this position. And so if I go back, in this variation, when we looked at it earlier, which came about with, I'll go back to the beginning, e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and then c3, the Ponziani opening, and then knight to f6, and then d4, knight takes e4, the pawn push, and then after a retreat, and then we had this capture, and we saw that black does not want to fall for the trap by attacking this knight with d6, so instead we have this move, knight to g6. And before we got to that, I wanted to look at this variation after capture, d5, and here. So what we looked at earlier was the retreat of this knight. But if you're going to play the Ponziani, I noticed something interesting when I was researching. In the book I looked at, I didn't see any mention of this possibility, but the computer gives this the #1 recommendation in this position for black. And it shows black going ahead with this bishop to c5 move, which leaves the knight under attack here, but threatens a check down here on this f2 pawn with a capture by the bishop. And so in this position, the computer recommends that white captures, allowing this check to happen, and then the game would play out like this. So check, the king can only move forward. And if we look at the evaluation, it gives black a small edge in this, although it's pretty even. And then the best recommendation is a retreat here to b6, which allows this knight to jump in here with a fork. And so then we may have queen to d5 here, attacking this knight, and also threatening a capture here with a check. And now the recommended move was to attack this rook. And for white, the recommendation was to capture here, forking the rook and the bishop. And now it's showing only one move keeps black in the lead, and that's to capture here with the bishop. And white's best move is to capture that bishop. And then, once again, it is showing, well, here, two moves keep black in the lead by about a quarter of a pawn. So whether that makes much of a difference, I'm not sure. And maybe that's why this line wasn't shown in the book I researched. I'll have to dig through some more literature and see if I can find anything else on this. But the recommended moves by the computer play out like this. So if we have the knight capturing, then the computer recommended a4 for white, threatening to attack this bishop, h5 by black, and then the knight moves up here where it can jump over and attack this bishop, or even move up here to b5. And then the computer recommends c6 here for black, which is slowly closing in the queen. And then after knight to c4, attacking the bishop, we have a rook move attacking the queen. And so now the queen can only move here to a6. And so I'll let the evaluation run a little bit on the computer, and you can look in the top right here of the screen. And here it recommends the best move is for black to just castle. Actually, let's see here. Maybe I should wait a little bit, because right now it is showing castling, and maybe when I looked at this earlier it recommended d5, which would be this move attacking the knight. And so now it is recommending that black castle. But earlier I looked at d5 attacking this knight, and then the recommended move was this, and then castling by black. And then now there's a threat of a pin to the king, possibly, maybe attacking this knight. But I don't know. Now here it's showing that white has a slight advantage. So anyway, if you decide to play this Ponziani opening, I would definitely look into this variation, which began here with leaving this knight under attack, but bringing this bishop here to c5, threatening a check here on the king with the knight supporting. So I don't know, that was just kind of an interesting line that popped up, which wasn't mentioned when I was researching this opening. And I better end here before this video gets too long. I hope you enjoyed this chess opening review of the Ponziani opening. I'm sure there was much more to this opening. I just this video would be hours long if I tried to go into everything that was happening in this opening. And so perhaps this opening deserves some attention to go in and look at it, especially in blitz games, rapid games. You could probably surprise your opponent if he has not played this opening or played against this opening very often. And so go ahead and try it out. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave comments, suggestions, and let me know what you think. Have a great day, and I'll see you all the next time.